It's cold. Mom, help me.
Margaret, my daughter who should be at my ex-husband Walter's house, suddenly called my mobile phone asking for help. In the dead of winter, with heavy snow falling, Margaret had been locked in the storage shed by her stepmother Ashley for over 4 hours. In a panic, I rushed over and managed to break open the shed door, only to find Margaret shivering and barely conscious inside.
Margaret, hang in there.
No matter how many times I called her, Margaret didn't respond, her face pale and bloodless. I hurriedly got her into the waiting ambulance and headed to the hospital, praying all the way. I'll never forgive Walter and Ashley for doing such a terrible thing to Margaret. Clenching my fists tightly, I resolved to seek revenge. I am Natasha, 29 years old. My husband Walter was my high school classmate and is now an office worker. We got married 8 years ago, and then I became a housewife. We were blessed with a child and lived happily as a family of 3 with our 7-year-old daughter Margaret. But things changed when Margaret started kindergarten. Walter began to look down on me, and unable to bear it, I divorced him 6 months ago. Of course I wanted to take custody of Margaret, but Walter strongly opposed.
How can a housewife like you raise Margaret?
I couldn't argue, but I couldn't let Walter take custody of Margaret just like that. The court ruled in his favor due to my lack of income and having no living parents to rely on, and Walter took custody of Margaret.
Margaret, I'm sorry, Mom can't live with you anymore.
My words broke off in tears, and Margaret, clinging to me, cried out loud.
I don't want to be away from Mom. I'm sorry. I promise, I'll come to get you as soon as I can.
I hugged Margaret gently, making a pinky promise. Wiping her tears.
Okay, I'll wait.
Margaret forced a smile and said. Since living apart from Margaret, I met her about once a month, enjoying shopping and chatting together, cherishing our mother-daughter time. Margaret became more clingy, always sticking close to me. Our happy times flew by, and every goodbye left Margaret with tears in her eyes, making me feel lonely too. Eager to live with Margaret again, I threw myself into job hunting and finally found a job, making ends meet. But still financially unable to take Margaret back, I worked hard, saving every penny I could. Then, 2 months after the divorce, I received a postcard from Walter announcing his remarriage, complete with a photo. His new wife, Ashley, was visibly pregnant. She looked like she was almost due for delivery. Was he cheating on me while we were married? Suspecting Walter, I called him. Congratulations on your marriage, Walter. How do you know that? A postcard arrived, with your photo. Didn't you send it? No, I didn't. Walter gave a vague answer, so I'm sure that postcard was sent by Ashley just to harass us. You seem so happy, good for you. Thank you. He seemed embarrassed. When I asked to speak to Margaret over the phone,
Mom, Ashley's going to have a baby soon.
Margaret told me excitedly.
Margaret! Don't say unnecessary things.
I heard Walter's panicked voice, and then he abruptly hung up the phone. So it's true. He was cheating even before the divorce. He's always been bad at lying or deceiving, so his panic probably confirms it. Yet, I feel ashamed for not realizing it sooner. From that day, Walter hardly let me see Margaret. When I said I wanted to talk to Margaret, he was blatantly annoyed.
Ashley's getting annoyed, so stop calling, okay? I just want to see Margaret. Please, let me see her. Are you trying to ruin my family? Stop it already.
Walter said that and hung up, not answering my calls after. I'm Margaret's mom. It's frustrating not to even be able to see her. I felt down from the helplessness but couldn't give up. I immediately went to a mobile phone shop and bought a pink kid's mobile phone that Margaret would like. Then, I waited near her elementary school and looked for Margaret as she was coming home.
Margaret! Welcome home! Mom!
When Margaret saw me, her face lit up with joy, and she ran to hug me.
I'm sorry we couldn't meet for so long. Yeah. I was lonely, but I was patient. Dad said if I'm good, I can see Mom. Yay!
I handed the kid's mobile phone to the excited Margaret.
Call me anytime. But it's a secret from Dad and your new mom, so don't get caught, okay? Wow. Thanks, Mom. Got it, it's a secret.
Seeing Margaret's happy face made me smile too. From that day, we messaged each other daily, talking about school and friends.
Margaret, are you having any trouble?
When I asked, worried.
Don't worry, Mom. I'm okay.
She always replied. Each time I saw those words, I felt relieved.
I'm always on your side, Margaret. I love you.
I told her every day. Even though we were apart and couldn't meet, I felt happy to be connected with her through messages. 2 weeks later. In the evening after work, it was snowing. Shivering in the cold, I was heading home when Margaret suddenly called me.
Mom, it's cold, help me.
Margaret's desperate voice came through, asking for my help, and my heart raced.
Where are you now? In the house's storage shed.
According to Margaret, Ashley had locked her in there for over 4 hours. I was almost panicking but tried to stay calm not to scare Margaret.
I'll come to help you right away, just wait a little bit. Okay, I understand.
Right after hanging up, I tried calling Walter's mobile phone several times, but he didn't answer. I was so worried about Margaret that I hurried to Walter's house. Upon arriving, the house was dark, no car, and it seemed no one was inside. What is going on here? I tried to open the storage shed where Margaret was said to be locked in, but it was locked. I broke the door with a shovel nearby and found Margaret inside, curled up and shivering from the cold.
Margaret! It's Mom!
Margaret, barely conscious, had a weak response to her name, and she felt very hot to the touch. I immediately called an ambulance and accompanied Margaret to the hospital. Why did this happen? During the transport, I kept repeating these words in my head, looking at Margaret's ashen face. I had been too reassured by Margaret's messages saying, "Don't worry, I'm okay." Why didn't I realize something was wrong sooner? I continued to blame myself for my naivety. At the hospital, the doctor told me she's in a very critical condition. Holding Margaret's cold hand as she lay in the bed, unconscious, I felt a burning anger. I will never forgive Walter and Ashley for what they did to Margaret. I'll make sure they pay. I had decided on my revenge. That night, Walter called me. Apparently, he had heard from the neighbors about the ambulance at his house and my presence.
Don't take Margaret away like that. Give her back. Don't interfere with our parenting.
I could hear Ashley's yelling voice too, perhaps on speaker mode.
The custody is mine. I won't let you get away with this. That's right. We'll report this to the police.
Amidst their uproar, I took a deep breath and calmly said, "Margaret has passed away." "What?" Walter gasped. After a moment of silence, he asked with a trembling voice,
"You're lying, right?"
"It's all your fault." Then, in contrast to Walter, I heard Ashley laughing loudly.
Ah ha ha ha. Good riddance. She always compared me to you and never called me Mom. I never liked her anyway.
I was shocked. Could it be that for such reasons, this woman was harsh on a 7-year-old Margaret, even locking her in a storage shed?
Besides, Margaret never looked like me. I even wondered if she was really my child.
Encouraged by Ashley's words, Walter joined in. I was barely able to contain my rising fury.
Was Margaret really my child? Maybe she was another man's child?
Their mocking laughter came from the other side of the phone. It was too much to bear. I didn't want to talk to these scum any longer. With trembling hands, I said, "I'll handle the funeral arrangements. I'll contact you when the date is set." After hanging up, I sighed deeply. How could they say such horrible things in this situation? I couldn't stop my tears from falling, feeling both sad and frustrated. The next day, I received an unexpected call from Mrs. Simmons, who lives next door to Walter's house. We were close before, and she told me a shocking fact. I immediately called the place she mentioned, confirmed the fact she told me, and gathered some more evidence. Now I can bring them down. Wait for me, Margaret. Then I told Walter I want to discuss Margaret's funeral arrangements, and arranged to visit his house the following Sunday. On Sunday, I visited Walter's house with a man, and Walter and Ashley reluctantly welcomed us. You were supposed to handle everything, weren't you? But there are funeral expenses and other things, right? I don't have that much money. Huh? What a hassle. Walter scratched his head and, turning to the man sitting with us, arrogantly crossed his arms and demanded, Hey, make the funeral for Margaret cheaper. Just give us the cheapest plan with a discount. They both seemed to mistake the companion for a funeral director, as I had told them we were meeting for funeral arrangements.
Hey, Walter. Do we even need to have a funeral? It's like throwing money away, right?
We have to, for appearances.
Well, Margaret's life insurance will pay out a lot, and the rest depends on my negotiation skills.
Walter, with a triumphant smirk, was adoringly gazed at by Ashley.
Life insurance, huh? Wonder if that will go smoothly.
As I muttered. Walter glared at me and said, Huh? So, I presented a voice recorder in front of him.
Please listen to this first.
What played was a recording of Ashley yelling and Margaret crying out. The sound alone was heart-wrenching. Walter and Ashley looked at each other in confusion.
This isn't Margaret's voice. Yeah, right. Must be someone else.
They desperately tried to deny it was Margaret, but I looked at them squarely.
No. This voice is definitely Margaret's. Don't you recognize the voice of someone you live with every day?
Still, Walter and Ashley insisted it was a mistake. So, I took out my mobile phone and showed them a video.
Still going to make excuses after this?
It was a video of Ashley forcibly trying to lock a resisting Margaret in the storage shed. Both the woman and Margaret's faces were clearly visible in the footage. There was no way they could deny it now.
Why do you have such a video? The dash camera at Mrs. Simmons' parking lot next door caught it. Some cameras still record even if the car isn't moving. The audio was recorded by Mrs. Simmons too, who was worried about Margaret.
Mrs. Simmons had always been fond of Margaret since she was little. She told me over the phone how she had been concerned about Margaret's well-being since I left the house. Gradually, she noticed Margaret losing her energy and thought something was off when she started hearing yelling from the house.
Mrs. Simmons was worried and reported to Child Services. Ashley, you turned away the social workers who came several times without letting them see Margaret, right? Shut up. It was just too much trouble. Yeah, having them come over is just annoying. It's Margaret's fault for not listening, it was just discipline. We were just trying to correct her behavior. What's wrong with that? Yelling and forcibly locking her in a storage shed is discipline? Don't be ridiculous. Margaret isn't your toy.
Walter and Ashley, still defiant, even had faint smirks on their faces. I decided it was time to introduce the man who had been with me.
Just so you know, this man isn't a funeral director. He's the director of Child Services.
The man, who had been quietly observing until now.
Sorry for the late introduction,
he said, extending his business card to Walter. Walter and Ashley's faces turned pale instantly. The director's expression became stern.
What you've done is a serious crime.
And he said in a cold voice,
You're exaggerating. As a director, you should understand that scolding a misbehaving child is a parent's duty. Exactly. Just titles and no sense in what you're saying.
Walter and Ashley were still defiant.
Enough already. Everything you've done has been testified by Margaret.
At my words, Walter momentarily opened his mouth in shock. Then, he suddenly burst out laughing.
Ahahaha. How can someone who's dead do that? Ridiculous. Yeah, what's she talking about? Ahahaha.
As they pointed at me and laughed, I smiled and informed them. Oh, Margaret is very much alive.
What?
That was a lie to prevent you from taking her back. Hearing this, Walter and Ashley were shocked, their mouths opening and closing like fish.
So, Margaret was a nuisance to you, right? You clearly said that. Then why didn't you give me custody when we divorced?
That's because I didn't want to pay you child support.
What? That's outrageous. You're the worst, not just as a husband, but as a father too.
I was furious to realize the true shallowness of this man who had fought me in court to take away my dear Margaret.
I'll take Margaret's custody back through court if I have to, and I'll make sure you both pay.
Natasha, don't say scary things. You can have Margaret, okay? Isn't that enough?
Not at all. Isn't reflecting and atoning for what you've done also a father's responsibility?
Walter still didn't seem to be taking things seriously, so I decided to press further.
And one more thing. Ashley was pregnant before we got divorced, right? What are you talking about?
Walter's gaze wavered, and Ashley looked down, visibly shaken.
No matter how much you try to cover it up, a simple investigation will reveal the truth. Be prepared to pay compensation. That's nonsense now. Can't we just let bygones be bygones? I apologize, so please, let it go. I will never forgive you. That's why I've filed a police report.
Upon hearing about the police, Walter's attitude changed abruptly, and he stood up to apologize deeply.
I don't want to get arrested. Margaret's alive, right? Natasha, please overlook this. I beg you.
Beside him, the previously defiant Ashley also bowed deeply to me.
I'm about to give birth. Please, Natasha. Withdraw the report right now.
I despised these two for their selfishness to the core. The director also said sternly, "Why don't you just give up?" But suddenly, Walter and Ashley tried to flee, rushing to the door. However, they were promptly arrested by the waiting police officers.
It's not my fault. Ashley did everything. What? You're the one who told me to lock her in the shed.
The two of them were shouting and resisting in vain. Their commotion attracted the neighbors, who gathered around. In front of the crowd, Walter and Ashley were taken away in the police car. Some time later, Walter and Ashley were sentenced to serve time in a trial. I filed for a change of guardianship and finally got Margaret back.
I'm happy that I can be with you,
Margaret says with the brightest smile. Determined to ensure a fulfilling life for my daughter, I resolved, I will make Margaret happy, no matter what.